All right, everybody, welcome back. Are you ready for another deep dive?
Let's do it.
I am so ready for this one.
Mm.
We are going deep on why young men aren't entering the workforce like they used to.
Yeah.
It's a topic that people have a lot of feelings about, and we are seeing that in the comment sections.
Yeah.
We're looking at 3 very different online communities, right?
Yes.
But our goal, as always, is not to pick a side,
Right.
but to see what we can learn by really dissecting what people are saying out there.
Yeah, like little focus groups.
Exactly. Like these are our little think tanks. So we've got Legion of Men,
Okay.
which focuses on, well, masculinity and men's issues.
Makes sense.
Then we've got Appalachia's Homestead with Patara,
Okay.
which is all about self-sufficiency and homesteading, as you might guess. And last but not least, we are diving into the comments section for Neil Oliver.
Okay.
Now, if you don't know Neil Oliver, he's this Scottish archaeologist who does not mince words,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to authority. So 3 very different communities.
Yeah.
But you know what's fascinating?
What's that?
They've got some serious overlap in terms of anxieties about the world and how young men fit into it.
It's like they're all hearing the same song, but they're playing it on different instruments.
That is a great way to put it. And one of the loudest notes we're hearing is this sense of disillusionment
Yeah.
with the workforce, this feeling of, what's the point?
Right. And it's not just about individual people feeling lazy.
No.
We're seeing comments across all 3 communities that suggest that people feel like the system itself is broken.
Yes, and that it's not even just that there aren't enough jobs out there,
Right.
but that the rules of the game keep changing.
Yes.
And not in a fun, competitive way, more like someone keeps moving the finish line while you're sprinting towards it.
It's demoralizing.
It's exhausting.
Uh-huh.
And speaking of feeling unheard, this comment from Legion of Men from a user named Crank Vegan
Okay.
really struck me. He said, and I quote, "The funniest thing about this news piece is that they never actually interview any young men in America on why they're choosing to stay unemployed. It's only boomers and women giving their 2 cents clown world."
Wow.
I mean, he does not hold back.
No, he doesn't.
But is he wrong?
I mean, there's a real frustration there, right? Like,
Yeah.
why are we only hearing from certain demographics about this issue? Where are the voices of the people that this is supposedly impacting the most?
Exactly. It makes you wonder, you know, who's controlling the narrative? Who gets to decide whose voice gets amplified? Who gets listened to? And we saw this in the other communities, too, this feeling of being unheard or maybe even misunderstood.
Yeah, and it's interesting how it kind of takes a different form depending on the community.
Oh, absolutely.
So like with Patara's community, it's all about being prepared, right?
Okay.
Being resourceful, relying on yourself and your community. So when she mentioned that her husband recently lost his job, the top comments were all about that.
Really?
Yeah. It wasn't so much about like, oh, the system is rigged against you. It was more like the system is unreliable, so you better be ready.
So it's less about the system is rigged and more like the system is going to fail you, so you better figure out how to do it yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Like one commenter, Faye Keller, wrote, "Prayers, a new and better job is offered to your husband. Thankful to know you listened and were ready and prepared for this possibility."
Wow.
So they're not denying that it happened, right? The job loss is real, but it's almost like, okay, well, we were ready for this.
Yeah, you've got to have that safety net, whether that's your skills or your community.
Exactly.
And that, in and of itself, you could argue, is a form of opting out,
Right.
but not in a lazy way.
Right.
More like, if the traditional path is full of potholes, I'm going to go this way.
Totally. And that brings us to kind of another layer of this disillusionment.
Okay.
Because it's not just about like the availability of work. It's also this question of, okay, even if I do everything right, will it even matter?
Right.
Like, is there even a point to this?
Yeah, especially with all the economic anxieties right now.
Exactly. Like, remember that comment from PT87153 from Legion of Men?
Yeah.
They said, there's no incentive. Less men are getting married, houses are expensive, and people can't retire.
Yeah, it's like that classic, work hard and you'll get ahead. Promise just doesn't ring true for a lot of people anymore.
Exactly. And that's where you get that frustration.
Right.
Like if those traditional markers of success are so far out of reach, then why play by the rules?
Right, why bother?
Yeah, why bother?
So if the traditional path feels broken and the rewards feel out of reach, is it any wonder that some people are looking for alternative routes?
Yeah.
But before we get there,
Okay.
we got to talk about this undercurrent of distrust that we're seeing bubbling up, especially towards authority figures and the narratives that are being spun.
Yes, they're being handed this story, right? This narrative that's supposed to make sense of the world.
Right.
But you can see the holes in the story. you know?
The plot holes.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's no wonder that people are looking for answers elsewhere.
Especially online, where you can connect with others who share your doubts.
Right.
It's interesting, though, because the way this distrust plays out, it seems to take a slightly different form depending on which community we're looking at.
Yeah, for sure.
So with the Neil Oliver comments,
Okay.
it's very much a distrust of institutions,
Yes.
government media, even academia.
The powers that be.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this comment from, I see what most cat really sums it up, I thought.
Okay.
He says, it's quite pathetic and disturbing how many people think they're going to vote their way back to freedom. Like there's this sense of we are on our own here.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see that reflected in the Legion of Men threads, too.
Totally.
This feeling of being powerless, like your voice doesn't even matter.
Right. Like what's the point of even participating?
Right. And it all feeds into that distrust even further.
Oh, absolutely. Remember Jim Bro 7086?
Yeah.
He called out the media specifically for this narrative of young men being afraid of hard work.
Right.
And he was not alone in that home. A lot of the comments were echoing that same sentiment.
It's like if you feel like you're being stereotyped and your experiences are being dismissed, you're not going to trust the people who are doing that to you.
Right.
Like Brendan History Maker Z said, I was thinking the same thing, but you know why they're not interviewing any of these young men, ... They won't like the answer.
Oh, it's like you're not even interested in hearing our side of this.
Exactly.
So why would we trust you?
Right. It's like they're trapped in this echo chamber.
Yes.
Where their concerns aren't being addressed. They're barely even being acknowledged.
Right. And that feeling of being unheard or even worse, silenced, it can be really isolating.
Oh, absolutely.
And this is what's so fascinating, is when you contrast that with what we're seeing in Patara's community.
Okay.
It's like a completely different approach to dealing with uncertainty.
Yeah, how so?
There's this real sense of agency, I think, in that community.
Okay.
Like even if the systems around me are crumbling, I can still create my own stability.
Right. So it's less about like reeling against the storm and more about like, okay, I'm going to build a really strong shelter.
Exactly. It's focusing on what you can control. Your skills, your knowledge, your community.
Right. And that self-sufficiency becomes almost like a form of resistance.
Interesting.
Like, I don't have to play by your rules because I'm creating my own game.
So is that the dividing line then?
It's hard to say.
Is this a generational thing where, older generations are still like, no, we've got to engage with these systems.
Right.
And the younger generations are like, peace out. We're going to go find something else.
I mean, it's tempting to see it that way, right?
Right.
But I think it's more complicated than that.
Okay.
I mean, yes, there are definitely generational differences in how people view authority and institutions.
Right, of course.
But I also think there's a growing awareness across generations that a lot of these systems that we've relied on for so long, they're not working the way that they used to.
Yeah, it's like we're all realizing that the ship is taking on water.
Right.
But we can't agree on the best way to bail it out.
Exactly. And when you can't agree on how to fix a problem, that's when things get really interesting in the comment sections.
So that's the understatement of the century.
Right.
Speaking of heated conversations,
yeah.
Can we talk about this whole generational blame game that keeps coming up?
Oh my gosh.
Because can you even have a conversation about this stuff anymore without someone bringing up, okay, boomer?
Right. It's like it's become shorthand for this tension.
Right.
Even if it's not always productive. I mean, sometimes it is pretty funny.
It can be hilarious.
Right.
Like that comment from Adam Cape, 8451, on Legion of Men.
What'd he say?
He said, why aren't young men working? Question mark, question mark. Better ask an elderly boomer grandma.
Oh, my God.
Like, you got to laugh.
Right.
But the reason it resonates is because it's like, yeah, there's a grain of truth there.
There is.
Like, you created this system, you benefited from it, and now we're stuck with the bill.
Right. And some people did not hold back on that.
Oh, no.
Like Jacob Perez 8921 said it pretty bluntly.
What do you say?
He said, exactly, exclamation point. They only interviewed the same generation that screwed over millennials and Gen Z as well as Gen Alpha.
It's brutal.
It is. But, it's coming from a place of real frustration.
Of course.
Like, this isn't just about avocado toast.
No.
There are real systemic issues at play here that older generations just didn't have to deal with.
Student loan debt.
Exactly.
A crazy job market.
Climate crisis?
Like, come on.
Yeah, these are legitimate anxieties
Yeah,
that previous generations just didn't face on the same scale.
Right. But then you have comments like the one from Arago 16,
Okay.
who goes point by point and lays out this very factual,
Okay.
very detailed list of all of the economic realities that young people are facing right now. And it's like, You can't really argue with that.
You can't. And this is what makes this whole conversation so tricky.
Yes.
Because on the one hand, you have these very real systemic issues.
Right.
And on the other hand, this narrative that young people are lazy and entitled.
Right. And it's like, which is it?
And the reality is it's both.
It's probably both.
It's more nuanced than that.
Of course it is.
And I think that's what's getting lost.
Right. So this generational blame game.
Yeah.
It might feel good in the moment.
Right.
It might be a good way to let off some steam, but it's not going to magically fix the problem.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, we're all stuck on this economic treadmill together. And pointing fingers isn't going to make it slow down.
So where do we go from here?
That is the million-dollar question.
Is there any hope?
No.
Is there anything in these comments that gives us a little glimmer of a path forward?
You know what? For all the doom and gloom,
Yeah.
there are some glimmers of hope. There are some interesting themes.
Like what?
Well, you know, for all this talk about how disillusioned everyone is with the system, we're also seeing this other theme emerge, this idea of like looking for alternative paths.
Okay.
Like if the traditional path is a dead end, maybe it's time to start forging your own trail.
Right. Like get off the beaten path.
Exactly. And we see that entrepreneurial spirit in some surprising places.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like even in the Legion of Men community.
Yeah.
Which can get, you know,
Yeah.
a little cynical, shall we say. There are all these comments about like carving out your own way.
Like what?
Like this guy Ajax T1Q.
Okay.
He says, do they actually want to know the dozens of reasons? They don't care about me so good. I am out. I will determine my life, some cash work, some tax work, and a lot free time in between.
There's almost like a confidence there.
Yes.
Like, okay, you don't want me, fine, I'll figure it out.
I'll find my own fulfillment. Thank you very much. And it's not even always about rejecting work altogether, right? It's just about redefining what success means, what's valuable.
Yes, and it makes you wonder, are we seeing the first draft of a new social contract being written?
Ooh, that's interesting.
Right? Like, what if...
Because we see this idea of, you know, opting out, or at least opting for something different.
Yeah.
Popping up with Patara's community, too.
Right, but from a different angle.
Yeah, it's like with Legion of Men, it's I'm not playing your corporate game anymore.
Right.
And then with Patara's people, it's more like I'm going to build a life where I don't even need your game.
Exactly. Like, remember Humpty Dumpty 762?
Yes.
What did he say?
I'm curious.
He said, they don't talk to us at all anymore. That's okay, ... When it starts, we won't be talking to them anymore.
Ooh, that's ominous.
It sounds ominous, but in the context of Patara's community, it makes sense.
Yeah.
It's about self-reliance community, knowing how to do things for yourself.
It's like they're building arcs while everyone else is arguing about the flood.
I love that.
Which I get. You know, like if the world feels like it's falling apart, you want to surround yourself with people who can grow their own food and fix their own plumbing.
That's a different kind of security, right?
It really is.
It's not tied to your job or your 401k.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So is it sustainable?
That's the question, isn't it?
Can a society actually function if you've got all these people who are like, you know what, I'm out?
Yeah, are we talking about a small but vocal minority, or is this the beginning of something bigger?
Right. Because it's one thing if it's a few people off the grid.
Right.
But if it's a whole generation,
Exactly.
that's a different story.
And that is the million-dollar question, and I don't think anybody has the answer yet.
No.
But here's the thing. Even if these comments represent a small slice of the population, they're still a symptom of something bigger.
Okay, what do you mean?
I mean, they're telling us that the old ways of doing things, the old definitions of success, they're being questioned.
Yeah, people aren't just accepting the status quo anymore.
Exactly. And that questioning, that searching for alternatives, it's not going away.
And it makes you wonder, how do we build a future that actually works for everybody?
Yeah.
Not just the people who are thriving in the current system.
Right. A future where everyone has a chance to find meaningful work.
Yes. And a sense of purpose, whether they're, you know, climbing the corporate ladder or homesteading or starting some whole new thing that we haven't even thought of yet.
Because maybe these quote-unquote alternative paths,
Yeah.
they're not so alternative after all. Maybe they're pointing towards a future where work and meaning are more intertwined.
I like that.
Where your job isn't just a way to pay the bills, it's actually aligned with your values.
Now that would be something.
Right. And that's what makes these conversations so important.
Yes.
Because the future isn't something that just happens to us.
We're not just along for the ride.
Exactly. We create the future we want.
So let's keep talking. Let's keep those comments coming.
Yeah.
Keep those conversations going and keep diving deep, everybody.